QuickBooks Pro Plus Desktop 2022 OneNote presentation, sales tax setup. Let's get into it with Intuit's QuickBooks Pro Plus Desktop 2022. If you have access to OneNote, would like to follow along, icon left-hand side, topic introductions, 6320 sales tax setup tab. Also take a look at the immersive reader tool. Topic introductions in the text area as well. Same name, same number, but with transcripts. Transcripts that can be translated into multiple languages, either listened to or read in them. Same name and number as presentation 2. Topic introductions designed to give an introduction to the topic, provide screenshots, links where applicable, accounting background, and can be used to complement the presentations if you don't have access to the software at that time. Closing the icon on the left-hand side, we're looking at the sales tax setup. 3 things you need to keep in mind. 1 we looked at in the past, that being setting up the sales tax, which includes going to the edit drop-down, going to the preferences, turning on the sales tax, and adding the items either there or in the items lists, which will then be giving the items the backup in order for the sales tax to be applied out to invoices and sales receipts as you make sales. And to set up the sales tax in those areas, remember that the sales tax is a state and local tax. You might be subject to multiple state and local taxes depending on your circumstances, which can complicate the setup process there. Once that is set up, you have the less difficult components of applying the sales tax to the applicable items that you will be selling. Usually those are going to be inventory items with regards to the United States. You might have a similar kind of situation if you have some kind of usage tax outside of the United States, a similar kind of tax situation. The tax laws may change from location to location, but there's no new tax under the sun. It's just which tax are they happening to hit the current people with that the current government has control over in order to implement that tax in that location. The third thing then would be to assign any particular customer that may be exempt from the tax and put that into their customer settings so that they will be exempt when you make an invoice or the sales receipt to those particular customers. So if we go through this, if we go to the edit dropdown and then to preferences, you got the sales tax. We turned on the sales tax in prior presentations. We set up the tax items here, setting up 2 items, which were the sales tax by the city, then the state. Then we set up a group that will be used then to apply out to the invoice and sales receipt. It says non-tax and tax items. These will be the items that will be shown to see if it's taxable or not in specific forms. We're talking about sales tax here. We set up the sales tax item this way, and we set up 2 sales tax items, and then we set up a sales tax group. If we go to the lists dropdown and the item lists, here is our item list. Here's our 3 sales tax items, 2 of them sales tax items, 1 of them the group. The group is the one that we want to be showing on the actual sales tax form. These are just mock numbers. It's not really these percentages, but we want a nice even 5% so that we can have a generic problem here. Here's the sales tax item. So if you opened up a sales tax item, it looks something like this. If we hit the drop down sales tax item here, we also have the sales tax group. The group looks something like this. Within the group, you can then select multiple items that add up to the sales tax items that you will be subject to in a particular locality, that group then being the actual thing that you apply out to the invoice. You also want to make sure that you set the proper item or group as the default setting as well. So back to the item list, then within the item list, you're going to say which ones of these things are going to be subject to sales tax. Oftentimes for the United States, those will be inventory items. Typically inventory items going to possibly the end user would then be subject to the sales tax. So you'd want to go into those items and turn the sales tax on. Those are the things that drive the invoice and sales receipt to know that sales tax should be applied primarily, and then secondarily the customer orientation. If a customer would be exempt from it, then you can go there. So then we have our hourly item here. Notice here's where the code, it says non-taxable because it's an hourly item. This is a service item not subject to sales tax. So when we add that to an invoice, it won't be subject to sales tax. If we go to an inventory item, however, then it says tax. That means sales tax there, meaning we will be charging the customer sales tax on this particular item when we create an invoice or a sales receipt. So we're in the customer area now. This is the third place you got to go, the kind of least important because most of the customers, or typically they will be, taxed by default. When you set them up, they'll typically be kind of subject to tax because that's usually the default setting unless you change that. But then if you want to turn that off, you could say they're not taxable. So even if I assign an inventory item that will be taxable, this particular customer would not be taxable in that instance. The tax that would be applied to them, if you had different taxes applied to them, you can change here, and you can have different groups if you have different localities, for example, that are going to be subject to the taxation. So then it's going to be the sales tax and the non-sales tax. There's the drop down there. And here's our 3 categories for the tax that this particular person might be subject to, that being the default. So when we create a sales receipt or invoice, it will apply hopefully the correct tax. We're going back into the preferences here, and within the preferences, we're going to change the default setting, which I believe was on the city tax, and we want it on that group actually down below, so that when we create an invoice, or in this case a sales receipt, it then applies the sales tax on down below, everything working as it should, because we have set up the sales tax, we set up the items, we set up the group, we assign the group as the default to then be a total of the 5% sales tax, and then we assigned something that is subject to sales tax, so it then calculates the proper sales tax as we create the sales receipt. Would do the same for an invoice.